Why? Because Yang Yi was quick. Too quick. If Dugu Jian was said to be running, then Yang Yi was flying. In just a few breaths of time, Yang Yi had left Dugu Jian almost 300 m behind. 300 m. That was no competition. Yang Yi was simply bullying him now. Dugu Jian had stopped, and his eyes were filled with shock and disbelief as he gazed at Yang Yi. The others below were in a similar state. They both possess void rank sword intent, so why is the gap between them so huge? That was the question that had appeared in the minds of everyone. Even though Yang Yi was only at the void rank as well, his sword intent was at the peak of the void rank. Could be said that his sword intent was too much stronger than Dugu Jian. Coupled with his body at the divine shift realm, how could Dugu Jian compete with him? Not to mention that he still had void rank slaughter intent and the sword domain. Without even utilizing the strength of his body, sword domain, and void rank slaughter intent, just his sword intent was sufficient to leave Dugu Jian far behind. Dugu Jian was stunned for a long time as he gazed at Yang Yi. In the end, a wisp of resolve flashed through his eyes before he chased after Yang Yi. Meanwhile, Qin Zhuyao gazed at Yang Yi and Dugu Jian for a short while before her figure shot up the mountain, but she was slammed down repeatedly. However, she didn't give up. After charging forward over and over again, a wisp of blood had started to seep out from corner of her mouth. However, she still didn't give up. Just like that, she fell, crawled back up, and continued her charge over and over again. Finally, after failing countless times, bang! A strand of terrifying sword intent suddenly exploded out from within her, and then her footing stabilized while she wasn't pushed down again. It was void rank sword intent. Clamorous noise resounded throughout the surroundings. Qin Zhuyao wiped off the blood on the corner of her mouth. There was a glow of excitement in her eyes. She didn't stay a moment longer and immediately chased after Yang Yi and Dugu Jian. Meanwhile, Huan Kong gulped and said, "Ice face, that works?" Lin Fan clenched his fists. He gazed at Yang Yi and the others for a short while, and then he turned to ask Huan Kong, "Why can they succeed but we can't?" Huan Kong puckered his lips. Perhaps, air. Right, why can they but we can't? I refuse to accept it. Lin Fan asked, "Shall we?" Huan Kong took a deep breath. "Let's go it." Lin Fan said, "The person who gives up first is the other's grandkid. You think I'm afraid of you?" As soon as Huan Kong finished speaking, he charged at Godfall Mountain. Lin Fan charged forward immediately as well. As expected, they were instantly slammed down the mountain. However, they didn't give up. They crawled back up and charged forward again, over and over again. In next to no time, more and more sword cultivators had started to charge forward. While they were slammed down repeatedly, they still didn't give up. Sword cultivator after sword cultivator at the foot of Godfall Mountain were charging up the mountain. Such a scene was rather grand yet should be called tragic, because some were practically covered injuries after the sword intent on Godfall Mountain slammed them off the mountain. Even then, none of them gave up, and they continued forward over and over again. Why could others succeed but I can't? That was the thought that resided in every one of their hearts. How could sword cultivators who'd attained quasi-void rank sword intent possess inferior natural talent? Or perhaps, many of them possessed natural talent that even surpassed Yang Yi. However, they lacked the ferocity and ruthlessness that Yang Yi possessed. If a person was ferocious and ruthless to himself, that person would definitely not be mediocre. Yang Yi was growing faster and faster as he traveled up Godfall Mountain. In less than 15 minutes of time, Yang Yi had left Dugu Jian almost 1 kilometer behind, but his speed didn't show any signs of slowing down. He maintained his previous speed. Meanwhile, Dugu Jian was gradually slowing down. His gaze was fixed on Yang Yi, who was going further and further away, and his eyes had no disbelief and shock in them anymore. The only emotion left in his eyes was determination. Qin Zhuyao was growing faster and faster behind Dugu Jian, and she was about to catch up to him. She was staring at Yang Yi as well, and she similarly had determination in her eyes. How could proud people like Dugu Jian and Qin Zhuyao admit defeat so easily? However, they were growing slower and slower, But not only did Yang Yi show no signs of slowing down, he was showing signs of speeding up. As for Huan Kong and the others, after experiencing countless failures, Huan Kong, Lin Fan, and a few other sword cultivators had started to stride step by step up the mountain. However, they weren't able to go far before they were slammed down again. Even then, their eyes burned with excitement, because they'd never considered ascending the mountain in the past. Because as far as they were concerned, they were too weak, so it would be impossible for them to ascend it. Yet now, not only were they able to step foot on the mountain, they could even travel a short distance. At this moment, they finally understood a principle. It wasn't that they couldn't, it was because they felt that they couldn't. Or perhaps, in their hearts, they felt that they were inferior to Jian Wuji, so they couldn't arouse the slightest intention to challenge him. They themselves had placed an insurmountable mountain before their own sword Dao. So how could they grow when they had such an attitude towards the sword Dao? When the heart was clear, so were the thoughts. Many people were truly able to accomplish that. Huan Kong and the others charged forward over and over again. While they were still slammed off the mountain, they were able to go further and further up Godfall Mountain. Their battle intent was blazing. Meanwhile, on Godfall Mountain, Yang Yi had left Dugu Jian around 2 kilometers behind, and he still hadn't slowed down. As for Dugu Jian and Qin Zhuyao, they weren't running anymore and were walking instead. Moreover, they were growing slower. As they went higher, the pressure that came from the sword intent was growing heavier and heavier. At this moment, even their void rank sword intent wasn't able to resist it anymore. It didn't take too long for Qin Zhuyao to catch up to Dugu Jian. Dugu Jian gazed at Yang Ye's figure and asked, Who is he? Qin Zhuyao gazed at Yang Ye's figure and said, Someone who brought honor to us, sword cultivators. At this moment, she'd naturally discerned Yang Ye's identity. Yang Yi was a saint and possessed void rank sword intent, so could it be any other person? Dugu Jian asked, Yang Yi. Qin Zhuyao didn't answer him. She just strode forward step by step. Dugu Jian didn't speak another word and just continued forward. After around 15 minutes passed, an explosion resounded abruptly from above. Dugu Jian and Qin Zhuyao looked up, and they saw Yang Yi suddenly crash down from the halfway mark of the mountain. This crash brought him behind them. Both of them were stunned by this. But just a moment passed before Yang Yi stomped his right foot against the ground and transformed into a ray of light that shot upwards. When he was about to arrive at the halfway mark, a strand of terrifying sword intent smashed down from above and collided with Yang Yi. Bang! A loud explosion resounded. It didn't take long for the sword intent that descended towards Yang Yi to be obliterated, and then Yang Ye's figure flashed up. However, he'd slowed down because sword intent was pressing down towards him at all times like a waterfall, but Yang Yi resisted it by force and was going upwards against its flow. Dugu Jian and Qin Zhuyao had arrived at the halfway mark as well, but they didn't continue forward. Dugu Jian said, This is a divide. Qin Zhuyao nodded. Their lives would be in danger if they continued forward. That wasn't the main point. The main point was that the sword intent above wasn't something they could resist anymore. If they continued, they wouldn't be acting fearlessly but courting death instead. Dugu Jian asked, Do you think he can ascend to the peak? She shook her head. I don't know. Dugu Jian nodded slightly. He stopped speaking and just stared at Yang Yi, who was still continuing forward. Qin Zhuyao did the same. She was staring fixedly at Yang Yi. She wanted to know exactly how strong this genius who'd suddenly risen to prominence was. At this moment, Yang Yi had frowned as well, because he noticed that the strength of the sword intent that he was enduring was much stronger than void rank sword intent. If he hadn't relied on his physical strength, then just his void rank sword intent would be utterly incapable of resisting the sword intent here. Yet now, he was only halfway up the mountain and was at least 15 kilometers away from its peak. Jian Wuji's sword intent was much stronger than he'd expected. Yang Yi took a deep breath, circulated the profound energy within him, and stomped his right foot against the ground before his figure shot forward. In the beginning, Yang Yi shot forward without encountering any resistance, but it didn't take long for him to slow down. Moreover, he was slowing down rapidly. A few breaths of time later, Yang Yi was slow like a snail and was practically incapable of taking a step forward. Break! Yang Yi roared with fury as his void rank slaughter intent surged out from within him. Once both his void rank intents had surged out, he became much faster, and it didn't take long for him to charge almost 6 kilometers forward. Moreover, he was still gaining speed. Dugu Jian and Qin Zhuyao were stunned by the sight of this. 2 void rank intents, and they are both at the peak of the void rank. Qin Zhuyao gazed at Yang Yi, who transformed into a ray of red light, and muttered softly. No wonder he was able to kill an emperor while at the Saint Realm. Dugu Jian's eyes were filled with disbelief, and he seemed like he'd lost his soul. 2 types of intents. That's cheating. It didn't take long for Yang Yi to stop abruptly after charging around 9 kilometers up the mountain, because a sword formed from intent was floating not too far away from him. Yang Yi's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he strode over. However, the void rank sword intent outside his body immediately surged back into him when he arrived around 30 m away from the intent sword. After that, his void rank slaughter intent surged back into him as well. Yang Yi pupils constricted. A moment later, his void rank sword intent and slaughter intent surged out from him once more. But they'd only just left his body before they shrink back into him again. They were acting like mice that had caught sight of a cat. Suddenly, a voice resounded in Yang Yi's mind. This sword intent is something the earth cannot hold, and the heavens cannot stop. Your path has come to an end. Yang Yi turned around and saw a slovenly old man had appeared not too far away from him. The reason he felt the old man was slovenly because the old man was dressed like a beggar. His hair was even so messy to the point it seemed like it hadn't been washed for years. Yang Yi glanced at the old man's waist and saw a sword there. You're the 3rd person to arrive here in the last tens of thousands of years. The slovenly old man walked over to Yang Yi and sized him up. You really are not bad. Your sword intent is temper well, and so is your slaughter intent. You have great potential indeed. Unfortunately, your cultivator is quite low. Yang Yi asked, Senior, may I know who you are? I'm just a slovenly old man. The old man waved his hand and said, You're really not bad since you were able to arrive here. You can't continue forward because you might die if you do. Yang Yi was puzzled. Why? The old man gazed at Yang Yi and said, You must understand that this isn't a test that Senior Jian Wuji left behind. His sword intent is instinctively protecting its master instead. If you continue up the mountain, it'll treat you as an enemy. When he spoke up to this point, he gazed at the intent sword and said, Senior Jian Wuji's kindness left the sword behind to stop others from going further. Yang Yi was puzzled. His kindness? The slovenly old man looked up at the mountain peak and said, Every person has a good and bad side. I presume you've realized it as well. The sword intent here is filled with killing intent, viciousness, and unwillingness. Actually, they are the negative emotions that Senior Jian Wuji had all those years ago, and a part of his sword intent carry those negative emotions. Not to mention you, even an emperor would be instantly killed before the part of his sword intent that carry those negative emotions, let alone you. Yang Yi fell silent. He knew that the old man wasn't trying to scare him, because the intent sword before him was stronger than emperors. Even the aura of an emperor wouldn't be able to make his void rank sword intent dare not fight back. Yet now, his void rank intents actually didn't dare to fight back against the intent sword. Moreover, based on what the slovenly old man said, the sword intent he would encounter after this intent sword was the truly terrifying sword intent. Yang Yi remained silent for a short while before he gazed at the old man. Senior, you said that 3 people have been here. I'm one of them, you are another. Who is the last? I'm quite curious. The old man pointed towards the distance. Look over there. Yang Yi looked along the direction that the old man had pointed towards, and he saw a huge stone there. There was a row of words on the stone. Yang Yi's pupils constricted when he saw the words. The words on the stone were, the sword god? Interesting. He recognized the writing, and the sword intent it contained was even more familiar to him. It was left behind by the founding ancestor of the sword sect, the Unfettered One. Yang Yi naturally knew who he was and had even received his help. Since he started cultivating on Profound Continent until arriving at the Radiant Dimension, he'd constantly heard of the Unfettered One's legends. But he'd never expected that the Unfettered One had actually come to Dark Hell Continent. See that? Meanwhile, the slovenly old man spoke abruptly. Because his sword intent is there, Senior Jian Wuji's sword intent doesn't dare to come close to that rock at all. I never expected that such a terrifying sword cultivator would have actually appeared on Dark Hell Continent after Senior Jian Wuji. But why have I never heard of him? Yang Yi remained silent for a long time, and then he glanced at the old man and said, I'm unable to see through your strength, so I presume it's at a terrifying level. But are you telling me that even you are unable to ascend to the peak of the mountain? Why would I ascend to the peak? The old man chuckled. I can't even compete with the two sword intents left behind here. So what's the point of ascending to the peak? Yang Yi fell silent. Go back. The old man waved his hand and said, It's rare that a genius in the sword Dao has appeared on the continent, so don't allow yourself to be killed here. Once you attain the Emperor realm or gain another breakthrough in your sword intent, then you can come here and give it another try. Yang Yi suddenly asked, What's above the void rank? I don't know. The old man continued. Only two knew, and only they have attained it. Yang Yi knew that the old man was speaking about the Unfettered One and Jian Wuji. Go on. The old man waved his hand and started walking towards the side. Senior, I have something to say. Meanwhile, Yang Yi spoke abruptly. The old man turned around to gaze at Yang Yi. Yang Yi said, Sword cultivators should charge forward courageously and grow stronger according to the circumstances. Right? Yang Yi chuckled once he finished speaking, and then he started walking towards the intense sword. My sword intent and slaughter intent dare not face this intense sword. Do you know what it made me think about? I didn't think about how strong this intense sword is. I was thinking about how my sword intent and slaughter intent were actually so weak. The old man asked, Is there a difference between that? Of course. Yang Yi walked over to the intense sword and stopped before it. He said, If I thought about how strong this intense sword is, then I would arouse fear towards it. Just like you, Senior. In your heart, Senior Jian Wuji is probably an insurmountable mountain. So, you dare not take a look at his sword intent that's even stronger than what's left here. All of you can do is gaze at this intense sword and sigh with emotion every single day. I'm not wrong, am I? Yang Yi turned around to look at the old man and continued, Senior, you've stayed here because you hope to allow your sword intent to attain the same height as this intense sword. But you failed to realize that this intense sword has become an inner demon of yours. The old man gazed at Yang Yi in silence. Yang Yi turned around to look at the intense sword and said, We sword cultivators shouldn't fear anything while we have a sword in hand. Those who have no fear are invincible. As soon as he finished speaking, a wisp of ruthlessness flashed through his eyes, and then his void-rank sword intent and slaughter intent surged out from within him again. However, they just surged out when they acted like mice that had encountered a cat, and they surged back into him. As for the intense sword in front of Yang Yi, it didn't move at all. Yang Yi smiled. It really is strong. Meanwhile, the slovenly old man walked over to Yang Ye's side and said, Kid, you're right. Very right. But can you feel it? This sword intent isn't something that void rank sword intent can resist. Your sword intent and slaughter intent aren't weak, but they aren't on the same level as this sword intent. Confidence is good, but you can't be conceited. Yang Yi chuckled. Senior, what is sword intent? The old man said, Sword intent is the fusion of the mind and soul. It's the harmony between the material and the void. It's both beyond something with form, yet it possesses form as well. It's ethereal, but once it's at a certain level, one isn't just able to sense it, one can even see it. Sword intent is an extension of our quintessence, and that quintessence is the sword in our grasp. When a sword cultivator possesses sword intent, the sword isn't an inanimate object anymore, and it has a life of its own. Yang Yi nodded. Senior's understanding of sword intent is very deep. Then let me ask you another question. What's a sword cultivator? The old man replied, Those who hold a sword and have comprehended sword intent are sword cultivators. Yang Yi asked, But how does one become an outstanding sword cultivator? The old man gazed at Yang Yi for a short while and said, "The enlightened sword heart, clear thoughts and fearlessness. Are you indirectly trying to make me praise you?" Yang Yi stretched out his hand and made a grasping motion. An intense sword appeared in his grasp, but just as before, it vanished in an instant. Yang Yi gazed at his hand for a short while before he looked at the old man. "Senior, your attainments in the sword Tao surpass my own. I'd like to ask whether I'm still a sword cultivator, since my sword intent doesn't dare to fight back." The old man was stunned. His sword intent didn't dare to fight back. In other words, was a sword cultivator without sword intent still a sword cultivator? Why were sword cultivators strong? Because they had sword intent. Just like Yang Yi, what had he relied on to kill quasi-emperors while he was at the half-saint realm? Besides his physical strength, it was sword intent. Because sword intent could provide a drastic increase in his strength. Otherwise, his sword energy wouldn't be able to pose a threat to quasi-emperors at all. It could be said that his sword intent was a huge reason why he was so strong. Yet now, his sword intent didn't dare to fight back. So, was such a sword cultivator still a sword cultivator? The old man clenched his fists slowly and wasn't able to return to his senses for a long time. Meanwhile, Yang Yi added, "It can be said that the reason we sword cultivators are so strong is that we've comprehended sword intent. In other words, sword intent is our foundation. Yet now, our sword intent doesn't dare to fight back. Senior, you possess wide knowledge and experience, so can you provide me with some guidance? What should I do now?" Yang Yi wasn't someone who liked to waste his breath. But he was really lost right now, because this had never happened to his sword intent in the past. It didn't dare fight back, and it didn't even dare to condense into form before that intense sword. He'd never ever imagined that his sword intent and slaughter intent would act like that. The old man remained silent for a long time before he spoke. "Kid, you're still young. It really isn't necessary to force yourself here. With the natural talent you possess, it's not impossible for you to advance higher than the void rank in the future. I'm serious. You're the sword cultivator with the best natural talent that I've seen in the last 10,000 years. It would be a loss to our continent if you are to die here. Even you have no solution?" Yang Yi took a deep breath. "Since you don't have a solution, then I'll use my own." The old man's eyes narrowed slightly. "What are you thinking of doing?" Yang Yi gazed at the intense sword and said, "If I'm stopped by this sword today, then inner demons will appear within me. So, I have to pass through no matter what. Otherwise, it won't be stopping me for a while but for a lifetime." When he spoke up to this point, Yang Ye's eyes suddenly turned blood red and were filled with baleful energy. "I, Yang Yi, do not fear the earth, do not fear heavens, and do not fear any man. Since my sword intent is fearful, then I, Yang Yi, would rather lose it. My heart houses no fear." As soon as he finished speaking, a faint fiery glow suddenly surged out from Yang Yi. Ignition of sword intent. Yang Yi was burning away his void rank sword intent. The old man's eyes opened wide as he gazed at this scene with astonishment. Have you gone mad?" He hadn't expected Yang Yi to actually ignite void rank sword intent. He's burning away his void rank sword intent just because it showed fear. He has gone mad. Yang Yi paid no attention to the old man, and his void rank sword intent was burning madly. It didn't take long for it to drop to the quasi-void rank, the heaven rank, the 6th level, the 3rd level. Yang Ye's eyes were shut while his sword intent burned madly. Had he ignited his sword intent impulsively? Sort of. But he knew that if he stopped here today, then he might not ever be able to improve throughout his lifetime. Moreover, his beliefs in the sword Tao which he held firmly onto would instantly collapse as well. He couldn't retreat, he absolutely couldn't. He'd done it so that he could take a step forward and so that he could maintain his heart towards the sword Tao. Otherwise, wouldn't his belief that he'd held onto for so long, his belief that sword cultivators should be fearless, would be nothing but empty talk? Did he regret it? He didn't. Yang Yi didn't regret it at all. He feared nothing, but his sword intent felt fear. Since it was like that, he didn't want his sword intent anymore. Meanwhile, the old man was clearly shocked by Yang Ye's actions. He ignited his sword intent just because of that. He's absolutely insane. That's void rank sword intent. How much fortune had to be gained and pains had to be taken in order to attain void rank sword intent. Yet now it's gone just like that. The old man withdrew his gaze and shook his head. What a pity! What a pity! After all, a top-rate sword cultivator was gone just like that. A sword cultivator without sword intent couldn't be considered to be a sword cultivator at all. As for such a person's combat strength, it would probably be inferior to an ordinary cultivator. In next to no time, Yang Ye's sword intent had been burnt to the first level, but Yang Yi was still burning it. Another short while passed and Yang Ye's sword intent had vanished completely. At the moment his sword intent vanished, Yang Ye's body felt light while his countenance turned ghastly pale. However, there was a trace of a smile on the corners of his mouth. What a pity! Meanwhile, the old man shook his head and turned around with the intention of leaving. However, the intense sword which obstructed Yang Ye's path had suddenly become translucent. It didn't take long for it to slowly disperse into the air. Yang Yi and the old man were stunned by this scene. Suddenly, the sword intent in the surroundings started to surge madly towards Yang Yi. In the beginning, it was only the sword intent around Yang Yi. But as time passed, more and more sword intent was surging incessantly towards Yang Yi for all over the mountain. The old man was stunned on the spot, because he noticed that the sword intent throughout the mountain was surging madly towards Yang Yi. Yang Yi was stunned as well. He didn't feel anything unusual after the sword intent surged into him, and it was even to the extent that he didn't sense the sword intent. He felt like normal. The slovenly old man suddenly said, "Kid, close your eyes and sense it. Senior Jian Wuji is helping you improve your sword intent. Attaining sword intent above the void rank sword intent requires comprehension. He's definitely trying to remind you about it now." Comprehension. Yang Ye's pupils constricted when he heard this. He didn't hesitate to close his eyes and started sensing the sword intent that was surging incessantly into his body. The old man gazed at Yang Yi with a trace of excitement and happiness in his eyes, because he might be able to personally witness the birth of sword intent above the void rank. However, there was more bitterness and dejection in his eyes. He'd thought that the intense sword had been left here by Jian Wuji to stop others from ascending the mountain. But he was wrong. The intense sword was here as a test. A test of what? Resolve? Courage? Determination? Fearlessness? He didn't know the answer. But he knew that this young man who was just a little over 20 had passed. A trace of bewilderment appeared in the old man's eyes. Could it be that my heart towards the sword Dao isn't even on par with a young man? Yang Ye's eyes were closed while countless strands of sword intent surged madly into him. In the end, the sword intent stayed within him for a while before seeping out of his body again. However, it didn't take long for the sword intent to surge back into him, and it formed an endless cycle of seeping out and surging back in. Meanwhile, at the foot of Godfall Mountain, Dugu Jian, Qin Zhuao, Huan Kong, and the others were looking up at the peak of the mountain, and there was shock in their eyes, because the sword intent around them was surging up the mountain. What's going on? All of them had the same question in their minds. The sudden commotion created by the sword intent on Godfall Mountain was too great, so it didn't take long for numerous experts to flash over from all directions. There were quasi-emperors and even emperors amongst them. Suddenly, a ghastly voice swept out from the top of Godfall Mountain. Besides sword cultivators, if anyone dares to come within 3,000 kilometers of Godfall Mountain or dares to sweep Godfall Mountain with their divine sense, then die. It was the slovenly old man. He glanced at the surroundings with a sharp gaze, and he didn't seem so slovenly anymore. Suddenly, a cold glow flashed through his eyes. "You're courting death." As soon as he spoke, he twisted his finger forward and tapped it towards the distance. After that, the sword on his waist transformed into a ray of light that shot forward. "Ah!" A shrill cry resounded from 3 kilometers away. A moment later, a shocked voice resounded. "Sword control point? You're from the Sword God's palace." The old man shot a cold glance at the man. "I'll kill you if you get closer." The other voice didn't resound again. The others around Godfall Mountain who'd intended to come closer had instantly discarded such thoughts. The Sword God's Palace. Jian Wuji had established the Sword God's Palace all those years ago. However, it was gone now. But no one dared to look down upon the power which had once been the #1 power of the continent. Moreover, while the Sword God's Palace had vanished, many of its members hadn't, especially those who'd survived. Every single one of them was a peerless expert. Now, one of them was here. Even though they were still curious about why such phenomena had appeared on Godfall Mountain, no one dared to come closer or scan the mountain with their divine sense. Godfall Mountain. Xianxia's eyes were closed, and his figure remained completely still like he'd turned into a rock. The old man gazed at Xianxia while complicated emotions could be seen in his eyes. Because even if Xianxia wasn't able to attain a breakthrough in his sword intent, he would definitely obtain huge gains. Moreover, once Xianxia attained that breakthrough, the old man withdrew his gaze and looked up at the peak of Godfall Mountain while complicated emotions remained within his eyes. Time passed slowly, yet Xianxia's eyes were still closed tightly. However, unlike before, his hands were clenched tightly, and his brows were knit tightly together as well. The old was gradually revealed a nervous expression. What was above the void rank? Not to mention him, all the sword cultivators of Dark Hell Continent didn't know. Will he succeed or fail? In the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed, but Xianxia's eyes were still closed. Moreover, the sword intent throughout Godfall Mountain was still maintaining the cycle of surging into him and seeping out. After 5 days had passed, Xianxia suddenly opened his eyes. As soon as he did, the sword intent within him instantly seeped out. This time, it didn't surge back into him again, and they returned to where they once were. It didn't take long for Godfall Mountain to return to how it had been. The old man asked with a slightly anxious expression, "Did you succeed?" Xianxia didn't answer the old man and just closed his eyes. Almost 2 hours passed before Xianxia opened his eyes again. He turned to look at the old man and said, "Actually, sword intent is everywhere." As he spoke, Xianxia stretched out his hand and tapped the space in front of him. After that, the old man watched with astonishment as an intent sword appeared in front of Xianxia. This intent sword wasn't the intent sword from before, but it gave him the same feeling as the intent sword from before. He succeeded. The old man took 2 steps back, and he shot a complicated gaze at Xianxia. But his eyes were mostly filled with bitterness. He'd thought about igniting his sword intent as well, but he quickly rejected such a stupid thought. Because if he did that, then he would really be courting death. Jian Wuji could have used the simplest method to pass down his knowledge to the future generations, but Jian Wuji hadn't. Why? Was he trying to keep it for himself? No. If he wanted to do that, then he wouldn't have left the intent sword behind. The reason he did that was because one had to truly gain comprehension in order to advance from the void rank of sword intent. Such comprehension couldn't be expressed through words, and it required one to gain comprehension on one's own. Just like many other things in the world. It sounded very simple when others spoke of it, and it even seemed simple, but only when one tried to accomplish it would one realize that it wasn't simple at all. Comprehension. Wholehearted comprehension was the key to breaking through the void rank of sword intent. If he were to copy Xianxia's actions without gaining true comprehension, then he would just be courting death. Xianxia slowly closed his eyes again. After almost 6 days of time, he'd finally understood what Jian Wuji wanted to tell him. He possessed void rank sword intent, and it was the limits his body was capable of enduring. It was like how a cup could only hold a certain amount of water, and it was impossible to fill a cup with a basin of water. What should be done once those limits are reached? The solution was to transform the body into an ocean. In that way, it wouldn't just hold a cup of water, it would hold an ocean of water. But to transform the body into an ocean, it required destruction and reconstruction. In other words, the cup which was the limit had to be destroyed. Now, his sword intent didn't come from within his body, and so long as he willed it, his sword intent would be everywhere. It could be said that the intense swords he condensed into form now were even stronger than Emperor rank weapons. As for its suppressive effects towards sword cultivators, it was even more terrifying than before now. Just like this very moment, even 100 Dugu Jians wouldn't be able to harm the intense sword that he'd just condensed into form. Not to mention Dugu Jian, even the slovenly old man beside him could do nothing to it. Unless the old man didn't utilize sword energy and sword intent. Otherwise Yang Yi could utilize sword intent to completely suppress the old man even if the old man had surpassed the Emperor realm. It was absolute suppression. Just like how Jian Wuji's sword intent had suppressed him earlier. Yang Yi opened his eyes. He was about to continue forward when he suddenly looked at the old man. "Senior, are you all alone?" The old man nodded and said, "Why?" Yang Yi replied, "I wonder if you're willing to stay in Cloudfall City? I stay there. Senior's attainments in the Sword Dao are extraordinary, so I'd like to seek guidance from you." The old man glanced at him and said, "Kid, stop beating around the bust. Your current sword intent is entirely capable of suppressing me. You want to seek guidance from me? I should be the one who seeks guidance from you. You asked me to head to Cloudfall City because you hope that I will fight for you, right?" He saw through me. Yang Yi didn't reveal any embarrassment. He just smiled and said, "That is my intention, but my intent to seek guidance from you isn't fake. I presume you've realized that while my sword intent has advanced, my knowledge in the Sword Dao is extremely limited. Of course, if you're not willing, then just forget I ever asked." The old man glanced at Yang Yi and said, "Even if you didn't say anything, I still would have gone with you." After all, he wanted to attain a breakthrough as well, and he would have the best chance of doing so if he went with Yang Yi. Even though Jian Wuji's sword intent was above the void rank as well, but this fellow before him was a living existence with sword intent that was above the void rank. Yang Yi was delighted when he heard this. After all, the old man wasn't just an emperor, he was a sword cultivator. So, those ordinary emperors couldn't compare to the old man's strength at all. Besides that, he wouldn't have to fear Doomsday City and the Dark Sky Sect with the old man's presence in Cloudfall City. Of course, he wouldn't fear Doomsday City and the Dark Sky Sect now even if the old man refused, and that even included their joint forces. Presently, he could annihilate ordinary emperors with a flick of his finger. "Senior, do you want to head up there and take a look?" Yang Yi pointed at the peak of the mountain. "I presume that you should be curious about what's at the peak." The slovenly old man glanced at the peak and shook his head. Even though he could go up there because Yang Yi was here, he was a proud person. How could he possibly do something like that? Even if he was heading up to the peak, he wanted to do it with his own strength and not rely on another to get there. Yang Yi understood the old man's thoughts and didn't speak further about it. "Senior, may I know your name?" "Jian Su." The old man sized up Yang Yi and said, "You're that fellow who's absolutely famous throughout the continent right now. Yang Yi, right? A cultivation at the Saint Realm and Void rank sword intent. Wasn't that Yang Yi?" Yang Yi didn't conceal it, not did he have to. He immediately nodded and said, "Then I'll be heading up first. This sword of yours." Suddenly, the old man pointed at the sword which Yang Yi had condensed from sword intent and asked, "Aren't you going to take it with you?" Yang Yi smiled at the old man and said, "I think that I should be helpful to those that come after me. So, let it stay here." As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi turned around and started walking towards the peak. A slight smile curled up on the old man's face when he heard Yang Yi, and then he nodded slightly while a trace of praise could be seen in his eyes. There were many people in this world who liked to keep secrets, or perhaps they should be called selfish. Such people couldn't bear to see others benefit and grow better, and they were absolutely afraid that others would learn what they possessed. Fortunately, Yang Yi wasn't such a person. Actually, Yang Yi was a selfish person, but his selfishness depended on the person and matter. If others were selfish to him, then he would be selfish to them. Jian Wuji had left an intense sword behind to help those who came after him to achieve a breakthrough in their sword intent. He'd received Jian Wuji's kindness, so how could he not pass down Jian Wuji's spirit of selflessness? His sword intent was above the void rank now. If it was any other person, that person might selfishly refuse to leave an intense sword behind. Why? Because in that way, that person would be the only person on the continent who possessed sword intent above the void rank. But Yang Yi didn't have such thoughts because only the weak would fear that others would become strong. The strong never feared that others would gain strength. Yang Yi was still 3 kilometers away from the peak. As he walked, he suddenly frowned again. Logically speaking, his sword intent was above the void rank now, so it shouldn't fear Jian Wuji's sword intent anymore. However, he noticed that the sword intent he sensed around him was a few times stronger than before. Most importantly, the sword intent here was filled with negative emotions like killing intent, baleful energy, and unwillingness. The killing intent and baleful energy here was many times stronger than his void rank slaughter intent. Or it should be said that they couldn't be compared at all. If his sword intent hadn't improved, then he would have definitely been corrupted by the killing intent and baleful energy here even if he possessed 2 types of intents. Suddenly, a voice resounded in Yang Ye's mind. Let me absorb the baleful energy and killing intent here. It was Heaven's gravestone. Yang Yi stopped and said, Can you? The killing intent and baleful energy here were too strong. They were so strong that void rank slaughter intent couldn't resist them at all. So, he was quite worried that Heaven's gravestone would lose itself before it could even absorb the killing intent and baleful energy here. Heaven's gravestone said, Kid, don't look down on me. I was born for slaughter, so the stronger the baleful energy and killing intent is, the more beneficial it is to me. Even though it's a little strong here, it's not a big deal. Besides that, I must improve myself. Otherwise, I don't feel safe by your side. You are really great at causing trouble. Yang Ye's face darkened. Don't you like that? Like that, my ass. Heaven's gravestone was slightly furious. Just see what sort of people you've offended. If it wasn't for that woman, not only would you have died during the battle at the Radiant Dimension, Heaven's gravestone, would have to erect my own gravestone as well. In short, it's too dangerous by your side, so it's much safer if I improve slightly. Leave me here and head up there yourself. It liked to kill, but its desire to kill varied based on the target. What sort of people had Yang Yi offended? They were either emperors or the Eye of the Heaven Dao, and it was even to the extent that he'd offended peerless experts who were above the emperor realm. It really couldn't survive if this continued. Of course, its true intention was that it hoped to be able to keep up with Yang Yi. If it couldn't keep up with Yang Yi as he grew stronger, then what would the outcome be? It was obvious. Yang Yi nodded and didn't speak another word. He just issued a command in his heart, and a blood-red sword appeared in front of him. Actually, it wasn't Heaven's gravestone's actual body. Just as it had said in the past, it had no material body. It existed so long as there was blood. However, while it didn't have an actual body, it had a consciousness, and that consciousness was like a person's soul. It had once hidden its own consciousness within Yang Ye's heart of slaughter in order to threaten Yang Yi. Yet now, it wasn't necessary to do that to Yang Yi anymore. Because based on Yang Ye's current strength, crushing it would really just take an instant. After all, Yang Ye's current sword intent was utterly superior to his slaughter intent. Not to mention a heaven-defying treasure like the primordial pagoda was there within him. The blood-red sword was slightly different from how it looked in the past because Heaven's gravestone's consciousness was within it. In the past, it was a dead object without Yang Ye's control. But at this moment, the blood-red sword possessed powerful strength even without Yang Ye's control. Of course, any sword needed a person as a medium in order to bring forth its true strength. Even the sword spirit's strength had limits without Yang Yi to swing the sword precursor. Yang Yi gazed at Heaven's gravestone that was trembling violently. How does it feel? Very strong. Heaven's gravestone spoke solemnly. Even though he hadn't comprehended slaughter intent, the killing intent and baleful energy here is countless times stronger than void rank slaughter intent. Kid, the gap between the two of you is really huge. Can you advance above the emperor rank? Asked Yang Yi. That was what he cared the most about. If Heaven's gravestone could improve once more, then it would definitely be extraordinarily good news to him. I don't know, but I'll try. As soon as Heaven's gravestone finished speaking, Yang Yi sensed the boundless killing intent and baleful energy in the surroundings start surging towards it. As it surged madly into Heaven's gravestone, The blood-red sword seemed to grow even more material and solid. Yang Yi watched for a while before continuing up the mountain. He really wanted to see what was at the top of the mountain. Of course, most importantly, he wanted to know if the stellar sword diagram was there. After all, Lady had sent him here so that he could obtain it. Yang Yi didn't walk very quickly as he traveled up the mountain. He could instantly arrive at its peak with his current strength, but he hadn't. He was sensing the sword intent around him. Even though he'd advanced past the void rank, he knew that there was still a very large gap between his sword intent and Jian Wuji's sword intent. Yang Yi had never thought of himself as invincible, and he never felt that he was extraordinary. Because there were too many experts in the world. Just like this very moment. Even if Jian Wuji had died countless years ago, Yang Yi was still able to sense how strong Jian Wuji had been. 15 minutes later, Yang Yi stopped moving. There were 2 stone tablets not too far ahead of him, and there were words inscribed on the stone tablets. Yang Yi gazed at the stone tablet on the left. I trained in the sword from the age of 3, comprehended sword intent at the age of 5, attained perfection in sword intent at the age of 10, advanced to the void rank at the age of 15. At 19, I was matchless amongst the younger generation of the entire continent. At 22, I was called the Sword God, and I was unmatched throughout the continent. At the age of 23, I broke through the barrier of the world and headed to outer space. At the age of 30, I obtained the inheritance of an ancient sword cultivator in outer space and comprehended the sword domain. After that, I fought my way through hundreds of worlds yet never suffered a single defeat. The words stopped at this point. Yang Yi clenched his right hand while waves surged through his heart. What was a genius? This was exactly it. Yang Ye's natural talent could only be described as trash when compared to Jian Wuji. Because Jian Wuji had attained void rank sword intent when he was still practicing with the sword. As for when he'd attained void rank sword intent, Jian Wuji was already called the Sword God and was unmatched throughout the continent. At that time, Dark Hell Continent had been a medium world, and the geniuses on the continent at that time were absolutely countless times more terrifying than the geniuses of the Radiant Dimension. So, how terrifying would he have been to be unmatched throughout the continent during that time? It was quite a blow to Yang Ye's confidence. Yang Yi felt like he'd suffered an injury. After all, one would only realize how inferior one was when compared to another who was much greater. Yang Yi shook his head, restrained his thoughts, and then gazed at the stone tablet on the right. There was only a single line on it. You fought your way through hundreds of worlds yet remained unmatched? That's because you didn't encounter me. Yang Yi was speechless. A long time passed before Yang Yi shook his head. Obviously, it was definitely the unfettered one who'd left these words behind. Both of these fellows were extraordinary. Actually, Yang Yi was quite curious about whether the unfettered one or Jian Wuji was stronger if they fought each other at their respective primes. Both of them were peerless geniuses who had comprehended the sword domain, and they were searching for experts throughout the world. So, Yang Yi felt that if they were to fight each other, then it would definitely be an absolutely brilliant battle. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible for that battle to occur anymore. Yang Yi remained silent for a long time, and then he hesitated for a moment and looked at a huge rock that stood not too far away from him. He waved his right hand, and it instantly arrived by the side of the 2 existing stone tablets. Yang Yi pressed his index and middle fingers together before waving them about for a few times, and then the stone was instantly transformed into another stone tablet. After that, Yang Yi started waving his fingers incessantly. A short while passed before Yang Yi smiled as he gazed at the words on the stone tablet, and then he continued towards the peak of the mountain. The peak was no more than 300 m away, but Yang Yi wasn't impatient at all, and he continued walking slowly. Throughout these past few years, he'd practically never rested for even a day, so it was really rare for him to calm down and take his time. He'd been too busy throughout his life. Yang Yi walked slowly, yet it didn't take long for him to arrive at the peak, and then he was instantly stunned. Contrary to his expectations, there was nothing at the peak. There was only a single black stone tablet not too far away from him. The stone tablet was very tall. It was around 10 m tall, and there was a short line of words on it. Do you know how weak I am? Tempestuous waves instantly swept through Yang Ye's heart when he saw these words. Yang Yi fell silent. He stared fixedly at it in silence. Was Jian Wuji weak? He definitely wasn't. But why had he left those words behind? Yang Yi had a rough understanding of the reason. During Jian Wuji's final battle with the old man in Taoist robes, he'd lost. But the old man was merely a clone. Jian Wuji had been unmatched before this, and he'd never suffered defeat. Yet now he'd lost to a clone. So, it was definitely a huge blow to him. Of course, that was definitely not the only reason. After all, Jian Wuji was no ordinary person. Defeat was absolutely not something that could make him suffer a blow to his confidence. So, something else had definitely occurred between him and the old man, and that was the reason why Jian Wuji had left such words behind. Yang Yi was shocked. How strong is the old man? He even made a sword god speak such words. Yang Yi knew that the old man was very strong. It was obvious from the primordial pagoda and the incidents with Lady and Jian Wuji. However, he didn't know exactly how strong the old man was. He had no idea. He couldn't imagine how strong the old man was. A long time passed before Yang Yi shook his head, and he stopped thinking about that question before turning around with the intention to leave. Suddenly, the stone tablet cracked apart and was obliterated before Yang Ye's shocked gaze. After that, a black scroll appeared before Yang Yi. The stellar sword diagram? Yang Yi was delighted. He stretched out his hand and beckoned, and the black scroll flew into his grasp. It had just touched his palm when it immediately transformed into a ray of light that shot into the center of Yang Ye's forehead. After that, Yang Ye's vision dimmed, and he opened his eyes slowly after the world around him spun for a moment. At this moment, he was in a gray and hazy world. Not too far away from him was a man with a sword on his back, and the man had his back towards Yang Yi. So Yang Yi wasn't able to see the man's face. Jian Wuji? Yang Yi frowned slightly. This sword technique is called Point at the Heavens, and it's at the Void rank. I obtained it by chance in outer space. That senior said that I shouldn't allow this technique to be lost in the world. So I left it behind here. I hope you cherish it, one who comes after me. Remember that you must attain rebirth rank sword intent to cultivate this technique. Otherwise, it'll definitely result in your death. The man with the sword on his back started walking off towards the distance as he said, during the ancient times, the Heaven Tao was heartless, treated all things like dogs, so we cultivators who fight for survival with the heavens should point our swords at the heavens. This technique was created for the Heaven Tao. If the Heaven Tao is unjust and assists the evil, then point at the heavens, and the heavens shall cease to exist. As soon as the man finished speaking, he suddenly pressed his index and middle fingers together and pointed them up at the sky. OM! A sword howl resounded before a ray of sword energy shot up into the sky. Yang Yi watched with astonishment as the sword energy grew smaller and smaller as it shot through the sky. It started as thick as a pillar, but it was thin like a needle when it arrived high above, and it was still shrinking. A few breaths of time later, bang! A loud explosion resounded in the sky, and then the entire sky cracked apart in an instant. It didn't take long for the scene around him to transform before he returned to reality. Yang Ye's eyes were still closed tightly as he recalled the scene he witnessed earlier. Point at the Heavens was created for the Heaven Tao. It was like Heaven Rend but different as well. He had to rely on the sword precursor and ancient sheath to execute Heaven Rend. But Point at the Heavens didn't require assistance from any treasures, and it just required rebirth rank sword intent to be executed. Was the true form of Heaven Rend or Point at the Heavens stronger? It was Heaven Rend without a doubt. The main reason it was stronger than Point at the Heavens was because of the sword spirit. When he truly joined forces with the sword spirit, it was equivalent to becoming one with his sword. Moreover, it was a sword that couldn't be ranked. But Point at the Heavens was just a sword technique that was created to fight against the Eye of the Heaven Tao. If he encountered the Radiant Dimension's Eye of the Heaven Tao right now, then he wouldn't even have to waste much energy to deal with it. He would just have to point his finger at it and it would vanish. To a certain extent, the Point at the Heavens technique was much more effective against the Eye of the Heaven Tao than Heaven Rend. Because while Heavenrend was said to be capable of rending the heavens, it wasn't created for the eye of the Heaven Dao. But point at the heavens creation was aimed at the eye of the Heaven Dao. A huge amount of information entered Xianxia's mind when he received the inheritance, and most of the information was related to the weak points of the eye of the Heaven Dao. Point at the heavens aimed especially at those weak points. It was like eating; it could be done with a pair of chopsticks. But what would happen if one was given 2 sticks? Perhaps it would still be possible to eat, but would it be as simple and effective as using chopsticks? Moreover, there was another difference between Heavenrend and Point at the heavens. He had to utilize the sword precursor to execute Heavenrend, and it would be impossible to execute Heavenrend without it. But Point at the heavens didn't need that, and even if he suffered backlash from executing Point at the heavens, it would just exhaust his profound energy. But the backlash from Heavenrend, that could take his life. Heavenrend was a technique that was used when he was ready to risk his life, but Point at the heavens was a technique that was to be used at ordinary times. In short, he liked the technique. After all, he'd always been enemies with the eye of the Heaven Dao, so he would definitely have numerous chances to utilize it in the future. Xianxia didn't choose to head down the mountain. He sat down cross-legged, activated the sword domain, and started cultivating Point at the heavens. Because he had the sword domain around him, he was able to cultivate it at an extremely swift pace. Unfortunately, he could only use the sword domain for cultivating techniques. Besides that, he felt even more regretful that he hadn't been able to obtain the stellar sword diagram on Godfall Mountain. Moreover, Jian Wuji hadn't left a strand of his soul behind and had just left a projection he'd created in the past. This made Xianxia feel slightly disappointed. Time passed slowly. 3 days later, Xianxia opened his eyes slowly. He pressed his index and middle fingers together. In an instant, a terrifying aura appeared out of thin air, and the entire mountain started to crack apart. At the same time, the space around him had instantly started to crack apart as well. Xianxia hurriedly relaxed his fingers because he didn't want to destroy the mountain. Xianxia gazed at his finger and grinned, and then he descended to the point where Heaven's gravestone resided. Xianxia glanced at Heaven's gravestone, and he noticed that it was still absorbing the baleful energy and killing intent here. At this moment, it had grown even more material, and the bloody and baleful aura it emanated even made his heart palpitate slightly. Xianxia nodded slightly at the sight of this, and he felt that it would be even better if Heaven's gravestone could advance to a higher rank. He didn't disturb it and continued down because he wanted to ask Jiansu something. It didn't take long for him to see Jiansu. Jiansu asked, "Did you obtain his inheritance?" Xianxia shook his head. There was only a single sword technique that Senior Jian Wuji left behind, and it was something he obtained by chance. The only reason he left it there was because the person who'd passed it down to him didn't wish for it to be lost. As for Senior Jian Wuji's own inheritance, there was nothing like that there. Jiansu shook his head. "What a pity!" Xianxia smiled. He seemed to have thought of something, and he hesitated for a moment before he asked, "Senior Jiasu, do you know where the stellar sword diagram is?" Jiansu's expression changed slightly. "You intend to look for it as well?" Xianxia didn't conceal his intentions and nodded. "I do need it." Jiansu gazed at him for a long while before he spoke. "Actually, it would be useless to you even if you obtained it." Xianxia was puzzled. "Why?" Jiansu looked up at the sky and said, "See that? There's a mysterious energy up there. It doesn't just stop us from leaving. Even stellar energy is isolated from our world. The stellar sword diagram needs stellar energy to be utilized. It's completely useless without stellar energy. Moreover, even if you have stellar energy, you can't utilize it without the sword domain. The laughable thing is many people in this world are searching incessantly for it. Yet they are unaware that it's useless even if they obtain it." Xianxia gazed at Jiansu. "Senior, do you know where it is?" Jiansu gazed at Xianxia. "You still want it?" Xianxia nodded. He had the sword domain. As for stellar energy, wouldn't he have access to it once he left Dark Hell Continent? As for whether he could leave, he wasn't worried about that at all. If the energy was left behind by some other expert, then perhaps he might be worried. However, it was left behind by the old man in Taoist robes. He felt that since it was the old man's, the energy should probably not make things difficult for him. After all, he was at least half a disciple of the old man's. At the very least, that was what he thought. Of course, he wouldn't be afraid even if it refused to let him through. If worse comes to worse, he would just slash it apart. If he couldn't accomplish it on his own, he had the sword spirit. If she wasn't enough, then he had the Xianxia. If their joint forces weren't sufficient, then he had the primordial pagoda. If even that failed, then he would really be in trouble. Jiansu glanced at Yang Yi and said, I don't know its exact location, but according to my conjecture, it should be at the ruins of the Sword God's palace. Because Sword God's palace had started to engage in internal strife once Senior Jian Wuji fell all those years ago, and besides fighting for the position of palace master, they were fighting for the stellar sword diagram as well. In the end, the Sword God's palace was destroyed, and the stellar sword diagram should be in the ruins of the Sword God's palace. The Sword God's palace was destroyed? Yang Yi was slightly surprised. Who destroyed it? Jiansu seemed to have thought of something, and his eyes were filled with fear and a trace of terror. A long time passed before he closed his eyes slowly. Someone who should have died had died during the internal strife, and it caused great calamity to descend. In just a single night, over 100 emperors died miserably while countless disciples were annihilated. The Sword God's palace was erased from the world overnight. Ha ha ha. Jiansu looked up at the peak of Godfall Mountain. We failed the founding ancestor. Yang Yi said, Senior, so you're from the Sword God's palace. Jiansu shook his head. I don't belong to it. I intended to join the Sword God's palace, but catastrophe struck Sword God's palace before I could even participate in the recruitment test. That was why I was able to survive. However, everything I cultivated belongs to the Sword God's palace, so addressing Jian Wuji as the founding ancestor isn't wrong. Yang Yi nodded. I see. Jiansu gazed at Yang Yi and said, I have other matters to deal with. I'll head to Cloudfall City once I'm done. Farewell. Jiansu's figure transformed into a wisp of light that vanished on the spot. Once Jiansu left, Yang Yi frowned. Who destroyed the Sword God's palace? Over 100 emperors died miserable overnight? Such strength is probably comparable to Lady when she was at her peak. Yang Yi took a deep breath. Dark Hell Continent isn't simple at all. I absolutely can't allow myself to feel proud because I've attained rebirth rank sword intent. Bang! Suddenly, a pillar of blood shot up into the sky. In an instant, the sky in an area of around 50,000 kilometers was instantly turned blood red while boundless killing intent and baleful energy filled every single corner of Godfall. Heaven's gravestone has advanced? Yang Yi was delighted when he saw the pillar of blood. Even though Heaven's gravestone was at the Emperor rank, it wasn't really sufficient for his current strength. But the sword precursor was too strong, and he didn't dare to use it at will even with his current strength. So, if Heaven's gravestone could surpass the Emperor rank, then it would truly be good news. Yang Yi was about to head over to have a look. Suddenly, his eyes narrowed slightly as he looked up. An array of blood-red light was slashing down towards him from above. What's Heaven's gravestone doing? Yang Yi frowned and flicked a ray of sword energy upwards. In an instant, the blood-red light was obliterated. Suddenly, a blood-red sword tore through the air and instantly arrived before Yang Yi. Yang Yi immediately felt like he was within an ocean of blood while boundless baleful energy and killing intent swept at his mind like a tornado. It caused him to be momentarily dazed. At the same time, his eyes turned completely red in an instant. But it only took a moment for his eyes to regain their clarity before he stretched out his hand and tapped his finger against the tip of the sword. OM! A sword howl shot up into the sky while the space around Yang Yi started to ripple violently. Yang Yi gazed at the blood-red sword before him. It wasn't much different than it had been in the past. It was a deep red color in the past, yet it was dark red now, and the baleful energy and intent to kill it carried was countless times stronger than before. Even Yang Yi, who'd attained rebirth rank sword intent, was affected by it. Kill! Meanwhile, Heaven's gravestone's voice resounded from within the sword. After that, A ray of blood-red light erupted from the tip of the sword yet was instantly obliterated by a speck of light which flickered on the tip of Xianxia's finger. Xianxia twisted his palm and clamped down on the sword with 2 fingers. Heaven's gravestone. What's wrong with you? Kill. Kill everyone. Heaven's gravestone was trembling violently, while strands of killing intent and baleful energy surged at Xianxia. However, it seemed like a barrier had enveloped Xianxia, so the baleful energy and killing intent weren't able to approach him at all. Xianxia's brows were knit tightly together. He knew that Heaven's gravestone had been affected by Jian Wuji's killing intent and baleful energy. Jian Wuji's killing intent and baleful energy didn't have a consciousness of their own, but they had their own unconscious instinct. Simply speaking, it wasn't just Heaven's gravestone's own will that resided within the sword. Jian Wuji's negative emotions were there as well. Presently, Heaven's gravestone's mind wasn't completely clear, so it was even possible for its consciousness to be eliminated by Jian Wuji's negative thoughts and emotions. Heaven's gravestone's consciousness was formed from boundless baleful energy and slaughter intent. But if there was a will to kill that surpassed its strength, then it wasn't impossible for Heaven's gravestone's consciousness to be eliminated. Kill! Meanwhile, a furious howl resounded from within the sword, and then it trembled violently and struggled free of Xianxia's fingers. After that, it stabbed straight towards Xianxia's heart. However, it stopped dead in its tracks before it could even touch Xianxia's clothes, because Xianxia had grabbed it. A moment later, a strand of sword intent surged into it. Ah! In an instant, Heaven's gravestone's shrill cry resounded from within the sword. Xianxia held the sword and spoke in a low voice. Clear your mind. Heaven's gravestone howled furiously. I can't hold on much longer. Xianxia frowned. He knew how prideful Heaven's gravestone was. If it wasn't really severe, Heaven's gravestone would absolutely not admit defeat. But it did make sense. Heaven's gravestone was just at the Emperor rank, but what realm of cultivation had Jian Wuji been at? He was a peerless expert, so Heaven's gravestone was probably no more than dirt before Jian Wuji. Even if the baleful energy and killing intent here were just a little of Jian Wuji's negative emotions, it wasn't something that Heaven's gravestone could resist. Should I eliminate Jian Wuji's baleful energy and killing intent? He could accomplish that now, but Heaven's gravestone's consciousness might be erased in the process, because Heaven's gravestone had fused together with Jian Wuji's negative emotions. Xianxia remained silent for a short while before he said, Enter the heart of slaughter. I'll deal with it. It's dangerous. It's very, very strong. Heaven's gravestone's voice carried a trace of pain. Just do it. Xianxia spoke indifferently. Otherwise, you're finished. Heaven's gravestone asked, Are you confident? Xianxia said, I'll give it a try. As soon as Xianxia finished speaking, the blood-red sword in his grasp transformed into a ray of light that entered his body and shot into his heart of slaughter. Bang! In an instant, a pillar of blood shot up and pierced the sky. At the same time, Xianxia turned blood-red. He closed his eyes and slowly sat down cross-legged on the ground. At this moment, Xianxia seemed quite terrifying. Strands of baleful energy, blood, and killing intent were surging like a torrent from him. If it was in terms of natural talent, then Xianxia was no monstrous genius. But if it was in terms of willpower, then he felt that he was really not bad. After all, the pain he'd once endured to temper his body was absolutely not something an ordinary person could endure. Regardless of whether it was Profounder Continent or the Radiant Dimension, there were very few outstanding body cultivators. Why? Because one had to endure inhumane torture to possess a body that was stronger than demon beasts. Such torture was absolutely not something an ordinary person could endure. Once one endured it successfully, then that person's willpower was absolutely strong. Xianxia knew that Jian Wuji's negative emotions were strong, but he wasn't afraid, because if he even feared this little bit of negative emotions that Jian Wuji had left behind, then he would have cultivated until now for nothing. Xianxia sat cross-legged on the ground, and his brows were knit together, relaxed, knit together again. At the foot of Godfall Mountain, Dugu Jian, Qin Zhuyao, and the others hadn't left. They were waiting for Yang Yi to descend the mountain. The peak of Godfall Mountain had always been something they looked up to and were curious about, because as far as they were concerned, Jian Wuji had definitely left his inheritance or something else there after perishing on that spot. In short, they just wanted to have a look. Huan Kong, who stood by Qin Zhuyao's side, suddenly asked, "Is he really Yang Yi? Are you not tired of this?" Meanwhile, Lin Fan spoke abruptly. "You've asked that question no less than 100 times. Even if you aren't tired of it, we are." Qin Zhuyao glanced at Huan Kong and remained silent. Huan Kong didn't argue with Lin Fan this time. He looked up at the mountain peak with admiration in his eyes. It really is Yang Yi. So he really was Yang Yi. My God. I actually spoke to him just now. Huan Kong seemed to have thought of something at this point, and his expression changed before he gazed at Lin Fan. Fuck! I spoke badly about him just now. Do you think he'd hold a grudge? Oh, this mouth of time. All the others were speechless. The corners of Lin Fan's mouth twitched. Do you really have to act like that? Huan Kong glanced at Lin Fan. What do you know? Let me ask you this. What sort of status did we, sword cultivators, have after Senior Jian Wu perished and the Sword God's palace vanished? No, we had no status. Before this, there were 2 peerless geniuses on the continent who can kill emperors at the Saint Realm. But none of them was a sword cultivator. It was Yang Yi. It was Yang Yi who allowed us sword cultivators to shock the continent once more. All of them fell silent. Huan Kong continued. After the Sword God's palace vanished, fewer and fewer train in the sword. Why? Because sword cultivators have fallen into a decline. Sword cultivators were once glorious, but we've fallen into a decline now. Yang Ye's arrival allowed sword cultivators to appear once more before the world, and it represents that sword cultivators will rise to prominence once more, because no one would dare to look down upon sword cultivators now. So, do you think it's wrong for me to admire him? Lin Fan glanced at Huan Kong and said, I didn't say that you were mistaken, but can you keep it to yourself? We already know that you admire him, so stop for a while, all right? I'm just too excited. I'm delighted. I can't control myself. Huan Kong gazed at the peak of Godfall Mountain and seemed like he'd been injected with chicken blood. Wasn't it just killing an emperor? Meanwhile, Dugu Jian suddenly spoke. I'll kill one another day as well. You! Huan Kong pointed a finger at Dugu Jian. Both of us like to talk big, so can we not attack each other? Dugu Jian gazed at Huan Kong and said, You think I can't kill an emperor? Huan Kong shrugged. All right, even if you can. I'm saying that even if, and I'm not saying that you can't, so don't misunderstand. Even if you can kill an emperor, but so what? Can you ascend this mountain? Can you? Look, he has gone up. But what about up? Lin Fan glanced at Huan Kong and said, Be a little tactful when you speak. Huan Kong shrugged. It can't be helped. I'm an honest person. Isn't it just ascending the mountain? Meanwhile, Dugu Jian spoke abruptly. Is that so great? As he spoke, Dugu Jian looked up at the peak of the mountain, and his eyes were filled with resolve. It didn't take long for him to start walking towards the mountain peak. The others gazed at Dugu Jian, but here were no smiles on their faces anymore. It was the same for Huan Kong. However, Dugu Jian suddenly walked back to them and said, I'm not feeling well today. I'll head up there another day. All of them were speechless. Dugu Jian glanced at them and said, I'll definitely ascend the mountain another day. Huan Kong gulped. He suddenly walked closer to Dugu Jian, and then he bowed slightly to Dugu Jian. I, Huan Kong, admit my inferiority before your shamelessness. As he spoke, he glanced at Dugu Jian and continued, You really are formidable. The others gazed at Dugu Jian as well, and their eyes were filled with gazes that said they were convinced of his superiority. Dugu Jian was speechless. Suddenly, all of them looked up at the mountain because a figure was walking down slowly from above. It was Yang Yi. Their eyes burned with admiration, and even the calmest amongst them, Qin Zhuyao, couldn't help but clench her fists slowly. It didn't take long for Yang Yi to arrive in front of them. He glanced at them and was about to speak when Dugu Jian suddenly pointed his sword at Yang Yi. I lost the previous competition, and you can raise your requests later. Now I want to challenge you. I'll admit defeat if you can resist 3 attacks of mine." Yang Yi was speechless. All the others were stunned. Obviously, they hadn't expected Dugu Jian to challenge Yang Yi. Yang Yi was slightly stunned as well, because he hadn't expected Dugu Jian to challenge him as well. To be honest, even if Dugu Jian was inferior to him, it would have still been possible for Dugu Jian to fight him for a while. After all, Dugu Jian possessed void rank sword intent as well. Yet now, not to mention Dugu Jian was by himself, even 100 experts on par with Dugu Jian would be no match for him. "What? You don't dare." Dugu Jian spoke abruptly when he saw Yang Yi remain silent. Yang Yi glanced at Dugu Jian. "Are you sure?" Dugu Jian replied, "Absolutely." Yang Yi nodded. "Then go ahead. Let's head over there." Dugu Jian was about to turn around and walk to the side once he finished speaking, but Yang Yi said, "There's no need to go to such trouble. Just attack right here and now." Dugu Jian gazed at Yang Yi, and a short while passed before he nodded. "All right." As soon as he finished speaking, Dugu Jian held tightly onto his sword with his right hand, while void rank sword intent surged out from within him. But his void rank sword intent instantly dispersed upon leaving his body. It had dispersed and not surged back into him. Everyone here was stunned by this scene, including Dugu Jian. Obviously, he'd never expected that to happen. Dugu Jian hesitated for a moment before he urged his void rank sword intent forward again. However, just like before, it immediately dispersed upon leaving his body. It hadn't been destroyed, and it had just dispersed on its own. At this moment, all of them were astounded, and their eyes were filled with shock and disbelief as they gazed at Yang Yi. Even Dugu Jian was the same. Why? Actually, all of them had come to an understanding, and it was exactly that understanding which caused their shock. Yang Yi glanced at Dugu Jian. "You've lost." Dugu Jian's face turned pale. You've surpassed the void rank." Yang Yi nodded. Indeed, all of them had complicated expressions in their eyes when they saw Yang Yi admit it. Besides Jian Wuji, the second person who'd attained sword intent above the void rank throughout the history of Dark Hell Continent had appeared. He'd appeared right before them. I've lost." Dugu Jian's face was ghastly pale, and he seemed to be visibly lost. A short while passed before he closed his eyes slowly. "I, Dugu Jian, obtained the inheritance of a sword cultivator by chance and devoted myself to it for over a dozen years. I thought that I would be able to shock the world, but ha ha ha. As expected, there's always someone greater." Dugu Jian suddenly opened his eyes and gazed at Yang Yi. "I, Dugu Jian, accept my loss, but I, Dugu Jian, will absolutely not allow myself to suffer humiliation." As soon as he finished speaking, Dugu Jian twisted his wrist and waved his sword towards his throat. Everyone here was stunned by this scene. Suicide. They hadn't expected that Dugu Jian would actually take his own life. Suddenly, a ray of light flashed. Bang! Dugu Jian's sword was instantly obliterated while his figure was pushed over 30 m back. What's the meaning of this? Dugu Jian gazed at Yang Yi. "You want to humiliate me? Humiliate you?" Yang Yi chuckled. "I'm not that perverse. You made a bet with me before this and you lost. Now you lost again. I think that since you lost, you should keep your word and not use suicide as a means of escape. Suicide seems like a very great way to go, but it actually represents that you can't accept defeat. Doesn't it?" "Exactly." Huan Kong suddenly gazed at Dugu Jian. "Dugu Jian, do you think it would be over with your death?" "No. Not only would it show that you can't accept defeat, it's a foolish move as well, and it'll even bring harm to us and your Violet Thistle City. Just think about it, who would Violet Thistle City blame if you take your own life? It'll definitely blame all of us. So, if you really want to take your own life, then wait for us to make our demands, and you can take your own life once you've completed them." All the others were speechless. Yang Yi glanced at Huan Kong and then he gazed at Dugu Jian. "My first condition is actually not difficult, or it should be said to be very simple. Just apologize to all of us, because your previous actions were truly quite annoying. so you have to apologize for that. He wants Dugu Jian to apologize. All the others had a trace of surprise in their eyes as they gazed at Yang Yi. They hadn't expected that Yang Yi would actually raise such a condition. However, it was exactly what they wanted. Even though Dugu Jian had been arrogant, conceited, and domineering, it hadn't brought any harm to them. So, Dugu Jian didn't deserve death, and just an apology was within reason. He wants me to apologize. Dugu Jian's face became quite unsightly. Since he was born, had he, Dugu Jian, ever apologized? Suddenly, Yang Yi said, "What? Is it very difficult?" Dugu Jian asked, "Can you raise a different condition?" Yang Yi chuckled. "I'm already going easy on you by asking you to apologize. Trust me, I don't like to waste my breath. If you don't want to apologize, it's fine as well. Just take your own life right now. As for Violet Thistle City, that's fine as well. If they dare to blame me for it, then I'll destroy Violet Thistle City as well. Don't you dare." Dugu Jian was furious. However, Yang Yi suddenly appeared in front of him before a sword stabbed at the center of his forehead. The sword pierced through his skin and threads of blood immediately seeped out from there. Yang Yi smiled. "There's nothing I dare not do. I'll ask you one last time. Will you apologize or not? If you do, then we can discuss the rest. If you refuse, then there's no need for any discussions." Dugu Jian gazed at Yang Yi for a long time before he said, "I'll apologize." Yang Yi withdrew his sword and moved aside. "This is how I do things. If you're friendly to me, then I'll be friendly to you. But if you act arrogantly to me, then to be honest, even I can't control myself once I start to act arrogantly. Besides that, you should feel lucky that I've been in a good mood lately. Otherwise, you wouldn't even have the chance to apologize." As soon as Yang Yi finished speaking, he gazed at Dugu Jian while slowly tightening his grip on his sword. If Dugu Jian showed even the slightest intention to take his own life, then Yang Yi wouldn't hesitate to kill Dugu Jian instead. Yang Yi was surprised to see that Dugu Jian didn't reveal any viciousness or killing intent towards him. Dugu Jian just took a deep breath and said, "I, Dugu Jian, accept my defeat, so I'll apologize." He turned around and bowed slightly to everyone. "It was my mistake, and I apologize for what happened before this. It's fine, it's fine." Huan Kong waved his hand. "How can anyone stay without any mistakes in this world? You're a good child for being able to recognize your mistakes and correcting them. Right, you should keep a low profile next time. Just look at Yang Yi. He didn't even say that he was Yang Yi. How humble of him. As for you, you should learn from him. Humility is the key to success." Yang Yi was speechless. The corners of Dugu Jian's mouth twitched. He ignored Huan Kong and gazed at Yang Yi. "Tell me what your second request is." Yang Yi gazed at Dugu Jian for a short while and said, "At least you act like a man. You can go now." All of them gazed at Yang Yi with shock. Obviously, they hadn't expected Yang Yi to just let Dugu Jian go. Even Dugu Jian himself hadn't expected it. He was stunned for a short while and hesitated for a moment before he walked over to Yang Yi. After that, the others watched with astonishment as Dugu Jian slowly knelt down before Yang Yi. "I'll take you as my master." This time, it was Yang Ye's turn to be stunned. The others were stunned as well. After all, they were in a life-and-death situation just moments ago. Yet now, Dugu Jian wanted to take Yang Yi as his master. Their minds were in chaos. A short while passed before Yang Yi gazed at Dugu Jian and asked, "Why?" Dugu Jian looked up at Yang Yi and said, "Because I want to defeat you, but you're the strongest sword cultivator on the continent right now. So, I have to learn from you if I want to defeat you. Otherwise, I might not be able to defeat you in this lifetime." Yang Yi gazed at Dugu Jian for a long time before he said, "I don't take disciples, but I've established a sword alliance. If you want, you can join my sword alliance. As for learning, I'll frequently spar and carry out exchanges with the members of the sword alliance who are sword cultivators. There's no end to the path of the sword Tao. Even though I've surpassed the void rank, I believe that only endless learning will allow myself to go further on this path of the sword Tao." The sword alliance. Dugu Jian hesitated for a moment before he asked, You're even willing to share your experiences related to advancing above the void rank of sword intent? The others gazed at Yang Yi when they heard Dugu Jin. Yang Yi nodded. Of course. So long as you join my sword alliance, I'll treat you as my own. I'm never stingy to one of my own. Dugu Jin immediately said, I'm willing to join the sword alliance. Suddenly, a voice arose from the side. Can I join? Yang Yi looked over and saw that it was the linen-robed man from before, Zuolang. Yang Yi smiled. He was just about to speak when Huan Kong spoke as well. Can I join as well? Lin Fan asked. I want to join as well. It didn't take long for everyone besides Qin Zhuyao to express their interest to join the Sword Alliance. After all, the temptation of advancing above the void rank was something that even Jian Su couldn't refuse. Presently, Yang Yi could be considered the last person on the continent to have attained sword intent above the void rank. If they wanted to improve their sword intent and go farther on the path of the sword Dao, following Yang Yi was their best choice. Yang Yi glanced at them and said, Let me tell you in advance that while you can join my sword alliance, you're no longer independent cultivators once you've joined. You'll be part of an organization, and you must obey my orders. If you can't do that, then it's best if you don't join. I don't want us to become enemies. All of them instantly started feeling slightly hesitant when they heard him. They were independent cultivators and were used to their freedom. So, being restrained was definitely quite difficult to accept for them. Meanwhile, Yang Yi added, Of course, the Sword Alliance doesn't just belong to me, it belongs to everyone. If you're not convinced of my strength, you can challenge me at any time. Our Sword Alliance only respects strength. If you're the strongest, you can be the boss. But if your strength isn't sufficient, then be a subordinate. So, it all depends on your own ability. Besides that, I will not stop all of you from leaving if you want to. However, so long as you stay in the Sword Alliance, you must obey my commands. Those are my conditions. Only strength is respected. Meanwhile, Dugu Jian said, The strongest is the boss. I have no objections. I have no objections as well. Meanwhile, Huan Kong said, That's how the world is. The strongest is always the boss. Besides that, we sword cultivators should stick together or there won't be a place for us on this continent. We should. Lin Fan nodded with agreement. I have no objections as well. I agree. Besides Qin Zhuyao, all of the others had expressed their willingness to join the Sword Alliance. In the end, Yang Yi gazed at Qin Zhuyao and said, Miss Qin, I represent the Sword Alliance in inviting you to join us. Qin Zhuyao's strength wasn't weaker to Dugu Jian, especially now that she'd attained void rank sword intent. Moreover, she was a quasi-emperor. It could be said that even if she was compared to an emperor, she wouldn't be much weaker. Based on his estimations, Qin Zhuyao had a very good chance at killing an emperor if she joined forces with Dugu Jian. Qin Zhuyao gazed at Yang Yi for a long time before she asked, Why did you create the Sword Alliance? Yang Yi replied, You'll find out in the future. She asked, Can't you tell me now? Yang Yi shook his head. I can, but it's pointless to talk about it now. Qin Zhuyao fell silent for a short while before she asked another question. We can challenge you at any time? Yang Yi nodded and replied, So long as you think you have the strength, then you can challenge me at any time. If you win, you'll be the boss of the Sword Alliance, and I'll obey your command. But you must obey my command until that happens. I'll join. She didn't hesitate this time. A slight smile curled up on the corners of Yang Ye's mouth. There were 35 sword cultivators here. Qin Zhuyao and Dugu Jian had attained void rank sword intent, while even the weakest amongst the others possessed quasi-void rank sword intent. Most importantly, all of them were quasi-emperors. Even though such a force seemed extremely formidable, around 90% of the strong sword cultivators throughout the continent were probably here. Based on the Sword Alliance's current strength, it didn't have to fear Doomsday City or Dark Sky Sect anymore. However, Yang Yi had never taken them to be the Sword Alliance's opponents. His was always looking further, even further than that. Meanwhile, Huan Kong suddenly asked, Boss, what's above the void rank? All the others looked at Yang Yi because they were curious about the answer as well. Yang Yi remained silent for a while before he said, "Do you know why very few know about the realm above the void rank?" They shook their heads in response. Yang Yi explained, "Because it's a realm that can only be comprehended yet is impossible to be imparted with words." Yang Yi wasn't lying. What was the rebirth rank? It was a form of destruction before recreation. In order to accomplish that, one had to attain comprehension of it, not receive information about it. Because the information received from others would only bring about an opposite effect. It was like life. Only by experiencing can it be considered as life. If one had never experienced it and only heard descriptions about it from others, then would one truly understand it? If he told them about it now, yet they hadn't gained true enlightenment about destruction and recreation of their sword intent, then igniting their own sword intent would be practically no different than courting death. All of them remained silent. Meanwhile, Yang Yi added, "I'm not trying to keep it for myself, but this realm can really only be comprehended and can't be imparted through words. Besides that, all of you shouldn't reach beyond your grasp, including Dugu Jian and Miss Qin. Even though you've both attained the void rank of sword intent, it isn't condensed enough or strong enough. What all of you need now isn't to think about how to advance from the void rank, and it's how to further temper your sword intent and your control over your sword intent." "Control over our sword intent?" Dugu Jian asked. "What do you mean?" Yang Yi glanced at them as he flipped his right palm, and an intense sword appeared there. As soon as it appeared, Dugu Jian and the others' expressions changed drastically, and they moved backwards repeatedly. Yang Yi was slightly stunned. He issued a command in his heart, and the sword intense aura immediately vanished, so all of them couldn't sense his rebirth rank sword intent anymore. Their countenances immediately eased up slightly once its aura vanished. Yang Yi said, "Watch!" As soon as Yang Yi finished speaking, the sword on Yang Ye's palm started to shrink at a gradual pace. It grew smaller and smaller, and it didn't take long for the intense sword to be around the size of a needle. Compression. All of their eyes opened wide. They hadn't expected that sword intent could be controlled like that. Yang Yi nodded and said, "See that? The strength of this intense sword is countless times stronger than before. Moreover, it can be compressed further. You call it compression. I prefer to call it the brink. Brink sword intent is the act of compressing sword intent to its brink, and then allowing it to explode. Dugu Jian and Qin Zhiyao, if both of you are able to learn this technique, then you'll even have a chance to kill emperors on your own." Yang Yi snapped his fingers as he finished speaking, and the intense sword instantly vanished. He added, "That technique is one of my trump cards. It isn't just an extremely powerful sword technique. It can be utilized to strengthen your sword intent as well. I presume it should be very useful to all of you." All of their eyes had a trace of admiration and acceptance in their eyes when they gazed at Yang Yi. Because this technique, Brink Sword Intent, was absolutely much greater than an Emperor rank sword technique, yet Yang Yi had shared it just like that. If they were in Yang Ye's position, then it would probably be very difficult for them to share their trump cards. After all, everyone was selfish. Meanwhile, Yang Yi continued, "Everyone is selfish and so am I. But I understand that if all of us act selfishly, then the Sword Alliance's existence would be meaningless. Everyone has their own sword Dao, and you've definitely obtained your own comprehensions and experience after traveling on the path of the Sword Dao for so long. Now, I hope that all of you can share it, so that we may adopt each other's strong points to make up for our weaknesses and grow together. I've already started. Now, it's up to all of you." A moment of silence ensued before Dugu Jian stepped forward. However, Huan Kong spoke before he could. I'll go first. Today, I'll allow all of you to see this thing that I've comprehended." Once there was a first, there was a second, and it didn't take long for them to start a grand discussion of the sword. A smile curled up on the corners of Yang Ye's mouth when he witnessed this scene. A long time passed before he looked up at the sky. Actually, he envied the Unfettered One a little, because the Unfettered One was all alone, and he could go anywhere he wanted. The Unfettered One could live his life for the sword. But Yang Ye's sword had its restraints, and it was his loved ones. Many formidable sword cultivators throughout history had sought to have no desires and have only the sword in their hearts. They sought the limits of the sword Tao. Were such people strong? They were very strong, just like the unfettered one. If a person focused on a single thing, and especially if that person was a monstrous genius, then it would definitely be extremely terrifying. The heart of a sword cultivator couldn't be shackled. It was something that Xianxia agreed on. However, Xianxia's heart was shackled. What was the shackle? It was love. Xianxia was aware of it, but he could never sever his connection to it for the sword. Why did he cultivate in the sword and strive to get stronger? It was to protect those he cared about. If even those he cared about were gone, then even if he became invincible throughout the universe, what would be the point? Xianxia had taken up the sword solely because of love. If he had to, he wouldn't hesitate to abandon the sword for his loved ones. However, he would absolutely not abandon his loved ones for the sword. Suddenly, the space in front of Xianxia rippled, and some time passed before Xianxia frowned. He turned around and gazed at the others. Something has happened at our Sword Alliance's headquarters. One of them was puzzled. Headquarters? Xianxia nodded. All of you aren't the only members of the Sword Alliance. There are many others, and our headquarters are at Cloudfall City. I'll tell all of you about it later. Come with me now and raise your speeds to its limits. For safety's sake, I'll be going first. As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia's figure transformed into a ray of light that vanished before them. How swift! Huan Kong was shocked. That technique is fucking cool. This won't do. I have to beg him to teach it to me once I get to Cloudfall City. Let's go. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be able to see a shadow of him. As soon as Lin Fan finished speaking, he and the others immediately transformed into rays of light that shot up into the sky. Cloudfall City. Sword Master Hall. After the city governor's estate had been rebuilt by Yi Luyun, it was named Sword Master Hall. At this moment, all the experts at the Quasi-Emperor realm throughout the Sword Alliance were within the hall, and Yi Luyun was leading the meeting. The atmosphere in the hall was quite heavy. Meanwhile, Yuan Feng suddenly asked, "Is the information reliable?" Yi Luyun nodded and said, "My spies in Doomsday City and the Dark Sky Sect have sent news that the forces of both those powers have been moving. If I'm not wrong, they might have joined forces. After all, an enemy of their enemy if their friend. Coupled with the fact that there isn't much of a conflict of interest between them, it's very normal for them to have joined forces." Yuan Feng was puzzled. Why haven't they attacked until now? Yi Luyun replied, "According to the information I received, all the other 5 powers besides the World Devastator cult seem to have gone to the ruins of the Sword God's palace, and it should have been their emperors who had gone. In other words, the strength they had at their disposal wasn't sufficient to crush us. Or perhaps it should be said that they didn't want to risk their lives. Because if the Sword Master is included, then we have 2 emperors on our side. But now that their emperors have returned, they would have absolute strength over us once they joined forces. So, there would be no need to risk their lives." Yi Luyun took a deep breath at this point, and she continued, "For safety's sake, I've notified the Sword Master. I presume he's on the way back right now." Meanwhile, Yuan Feng spoke solemnly, "If they've really joined forces, then even the Sword Master's presence would probably make no difference." Yi Luyun raised her head and looked out of the hall in silence. Meanwhile, a terrifying aura suddenly appeared in the sky above the city. Emperors had arrived. However, a sword howl suddenly resounded in the sky above. Yi Luyun and the others instantly heaved sighs of relief when they heard that sword howl. In the sky above Cloudfall City, after executing a few void flashes in succession, Xianxia had finally rushed back here. Yuan Tianyi and the man in violet robes from Doomsday City were standing not too far away from Xianxia. Xianxia smiled. "Only 2 emperors? That doesn't seem to be sufficient." "How come?" Yuan Tianyi chuckled. As soon as he finished speaking, 3 old men instantly appeared around him. 5 emperors. Yuan Tianyi gazed at Xianxia and said, "I told you, your Sword Alliance won't live for long. I told you to wait and see. Now, what do you think?" Xianxia glanced at them and shook his head. It's still not enough. 5 emperors aren't enough. Yuan Tianyi and the others were stunned when they heard Yang Yi, and then they shook their heads and chuckled. Was there an expert on Dark Hell Continent who could fight 5 emperors alone? There definitely was, and there might be more than one. But it didn't include Yang Yi. A saint was capable of challenging 5 emperors? Perhaps Jian Wuji could give it a try if he was reborn. So you're already wildly arrogant to such an extent. Yuan Tianyi shook his head. Actually, we don't even have to join forces and even dispatch 5 emperors when dealing with you. You have to realize that we haven't dispatched 5 emperors for you, we've done so for the people backing you. No matter who is standing behind you, my Dark Sky Sect and Doomsday City will definitely annihilate you today. Yang Yi glanced at Yuan Tianyi's group and said, Actually, I really had no intention to cause trouble upon arriving here, and I never treated all of you as my opponents. But all of you insist on making me your enemy and refuse to stop until you kill me. Yang Yi shrugged at this point and continued, I'll give both our sides a final chance. Leave right now and we'll each mind our own business, all right? Yuan Tianyi smiled. What if we refuse? Yang Yi asked. Are you sure? Yuan Tianyi looked Yang Yi in the eyes and replied, I'm very sure. Yang Yi gazed at Yuan Tianyi for a short while, and then he nodded. I like to go to extremes, especially when dealing with my enemies. Since you've chosen to become my enemy, then the Dark Sky Sect and Doomsday City will vanish from this world after today. One must always pull up weeds by the roots. As soon as Yang Yi finished speaking, he suddenly stomped his right foot down, and then his figure vanished on the spot. The ultimate version of death by a thought. At the moment Yang Yi's figure vanished, Yuan Tianyi and the others' expressions had instantly changed drastically. They sensed danger, extreme danger. But Yang Yi was truly too fast. Even they could only sense a trace of Yang Yi's aura and movement. An instant later, Yang Yi had appeared behind one of the emperors from the Dark Sky Sect. That emperor was about to turn around attack when he noticed Yang Yi behind him. Hiss! Suddenly, a strand of blood sprayed from the center of his forehead. The old man's eyes opened wide while terror and disbelief filled them. Instant annihilation. Yang Yi had killed an emperor in an instant. Yuan Tianyi and the others' expressions changed drastically. Just like the dead old man, they had disbelief in their eyes. But Yang Yi paid no attention to them. He patted his chest, and then Snowy emerged from within, opened her mouth and sucked. The spirit energy that was seeping out from the emperor behind him instantly surged into Snowy's mouth. Snowy burped, rubbed her head against Yang Yi's chest, and then her eyeballs started spinning about. She was ceaselessly sizing up Yuan Tianyi and the others while licking her lips. As far as she was concerned, all of them were like tonics to her. Yuan Tianyi gazed at Yang Yi with astonishment, and his voice trembled. You've surpassed the void rank of sword intent. Yang Yi didn't speak. He just waved his right hand to put the corpse away, and then he stomped his foot against the space beneath him again, causing the space there to tremble. A ray of light hadn't even shot forward, but Yuan Tianyi and the others' expressions had changed drastically again. Numerous terrifying auras surged out from within them. At the same time, dense layers of profound energy barriers appeared around them. Moreover, 2 of the old men had even withdrawn shields and placed them in front of themselves. They acted like they were facing a formidable enemy. They couldn't be said to be acting in an embarrassing manner. One could only say that Yang Yi's previous attack was truly too terrifying. After all, it was an emperor. But an emperor had been killed in an instant. Could they accomplish that? They couldn't accomplish that even if all 4 of them joined forces. However, right when they thought Yang Yi was attacking, Yang Yi chuckled instead. What are all of you doing? My leg was just itchy. Yuan Tianyi and the others' faces instantly turned unsightly when they heard him. However, Yang Yi suddenly stomped his foot down again, and his figure vanished on the spot. When Yang Yi's figure appeared once more, he was in front of the gray-robed old man who stood by Yuan Tianyi's side. The gray-robed old man's pupils had constricted when Yang Yi's figure vanished, and then the profound energy within him surged into the shield in front of him. At the same time, Numerous profound energy barriers were appearing incessantly around him. Attack! At the moment Yang Ye's figure vanished, Yuan Tianyi had immediately decided to attack. The other two old men didn't hesitate and attacked right away as well. Meanwhile, a sword had stabbed against the old man's shield. Bang! The sky shook violently as the shield and the profound energy barriers behind it cracked apart in an instant. At the same time, the old man was even blasted backwards by the force of the collision. However, Yang Ye's sword was like a shadow that stuck closely to the shield. Yang Yi gazed at the old man whose face was covered in horror, and he grinned before he suddenly grabbed his sword with both hands and twisted his wrist. Hiss! A ray of sword energy shot through the old man's chest, and a string of blood sprayed out. Rebirth rank sword intent instantly destroyed the vitality within the gray-robed old man, and it didn't take long for the color in the old man's eyes to fade away. Snowy hurriedly emerged from Yang Ye's chest and sucked away the old man's spirit energy. Meanwhile, Yuan Tianyi and the others had arrived behind Yang Yi. However, a terrifying wave of sword intent suddenly appeared in front of Yang Yi, and it blasted them almost 3 kilometers away. Rebirth rank sword intent. Void rank sword intent was already capable of resisting the aura of emperors, and rebirth rank sword intent had fully surpassed the emperor realm. Simply speaking, an emperor might not even be able to win against an intense sword he created. After the ultimate version of death by a thought was enhanced by rebirth rank sword intent, its strength was more than 30 times greater. It was capable of killing emperors with ease. In short, even if he casually released a strand of sword energy and enhanced it with rebirth rank sword intent, then it would be comparable to an emperor rank sword technique. That was how terrifying rebirth rank sword intent was. Yuan Tianyi and the others were absolutely shocked when Yang Ye's sword intent blasted them back. At this moment, they knew that they had no chance to win. After all, Yang Yi was capable of killing emperors in an instant. Meanwhile, Snowy had finished absorbing the spirit energy. Yang Yi rubbed her head lightly, and then he put the corpse away with a wave of his right hand. After that, he gazed at Yuan Tianyi. "I'm really curious about something. How many more emperors does your dark sky sect have after I kill you? I presume it probably isn't more than 2, right?" Yuan Tianyi took a deep breath and said, "My dark sky sect was in the wrong, and we're willing to apologize for this matter. Moreover, we guarantee that we will absolutely not go against the Sword Alliance in the future." The violet-robed middle-aged man by Yuan Tianyi's side spoke as well. "My Doomsday City is willing to apologize as well, and we guarantee to never go against the Sword Alliance again." Yang Yi chuckled. "When I wanted to reason with all of you, you insisted to use strength to talk. Now, I'm using strength to talk with you, yet you want to reason with me. Remember what I said in the beginning? I gave all of you one last chance. Unfortunately, you didn't cherish it. Allow me to repeat myself. Since we're enemies, I prefer to pull out weeds by the roots." As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Ye's figure vanished once more. "Flee!" Yuan Tianyi immediately made the decision to flee. His figure flashed like a bolt of lightning towards the distance. The other 2 emperors from Doomsday City fled towards 2 other directions as well. Fight? They had no desire to fight. What a joke! Yang Yi could kill emperors in an instant. An instant. Yang Yi glanced at Yuan Tianyi, hesitated for a moment, and then turned to look at the violet-robed middle-aged man. His profound energy was sufficient to execute the ultimate version of death by a thought for one last time. So who should he kill? He chose the violet-robed middle-aged man from Doomsday City. A moment later, Yang Ye's figure had vanished on the spot. Around 10 kilometers away, the middle-aged man had stopped in midair, and Yang Yi wasn't very far ahead of him. He glanced at the hole in his chest and gazed at Yang Yi. How swift?" Yang Yi replied modestly, "It was just all right." The middle-aged man almost suffocated with rage before he took his last breath. At the same time, Snowy's head emerged once more, and then the spirit energy which hadn't even started to seep out from the middle-aged man was sucked away. Yang Ye's expression changed slightly at the sight of this. He suddenly thought of a possibility. If Snowy just sucked the spirit energy within a person, A chill ran down Xianxia's spine because it was absolutely terrifying. After all, spirit energy was the foundation of a cultivator, and if a cultivator had no spirit energy, many would be crippled. Not to mention others, even he feared such an ability. Even though his body was strong and remained strong even without spirit energy, he would lose at least 50% of his strength when he had no spirit energy. Moreover, if he was injured, then how would he repair his body without spirit energy? Fortunately, Snowy was on his side. Xiangyi heaved a slight sigh of relief at this point, and then he rubbed Snowy's head lightly. After that, he looked up and gazed towards the distance. At this moment, there was no sign of Yuan Tianyi and the other emperor from Doomsday City. Meanwhile, Dugu Jian and the others appeared not too far away from him. Moreover, besides shock, their gazes carried a trace of fervor as they looked at Xiangyi. They'd witnessed the battle, and the only reason they hadn't shown themselves was because Xiangyi prohibited it. Xiangyi had killed 3 emperors in an instant, and he'd done so while at the Saint Realm. Xiangyi glanced at Dugu Jian and the others, and then he nodded. The reason he hadn't allowed them to join the battle was very simple. It was to make a show of strength. Sword cultivators were proud. If he didn't possess absolute strength, then they wouldn't be satisfied with being under his leadership. Moreover, putting on a show of strength could deter those who had other thoughts. Now, when he saw the expressions they had, he knew that its effect was very good. Sword Master. Meanwhile, Yi Luyun led the others over to Xiangyi and bowed respectfully to him. After all, they'd personally witnessed how he killed 3 emperors in an instant. At this moment, Xiangyi was like a god in their hearts. Rise! Xiangyi waved his hand and said, Order those at the quasi-emperor realm and above to come with me. Yuan Feng asked, Where are we going? We'll annihilate Doomsday City first and crush the Dark Sky Sect after that. Annihilate Doomsday City. Crush the Dark Sky Sect. All of their hearts shook. They knew that a change to the powers of the continent was coming. None of them objected, nor did any of them dare to object. They set out for Doomsday City under Yang Ye's lead. Isn't it a little too rushed? Yi Luyun spoke softly by Yang Ye's side. She hadn't raised any questions when Yang Yi made the decision earlier. It was a smart move, because she could ask as she pleased in private and even object to Yang Ye's decisions. However, she knew very well what she had to do in public. She couldn't damage Yang Ye's prestige, nor did she dare to do so. Yang Yi shook his head slightly. Our morale is at its peak, so it's the most suitable moment to attack. Moreover, there's no difference between being hasty or not, because Doomsday City isn't a threat to us anymore. Right? Get ready for the Sword Alliance to move into Doomsday City once we've annihilated them. Cloudfall City's location is too remote and it's too small. It isn't suitable for the Sword Alliance to grow. Doomsday City just happens to be barely enough. Yi Luyun replied, I've already planned everything. Ha! Yang Yi turned around to gaze at her, and there was a trace of surprise in his eyes. You've planned everything? Yi Luyun gently combed her hair behind her ears and spoke softly. Just as you've said, Cloudfall City's location is too remote and it's too small. Moreover, it isn't suitable for spirit veins to grow. So, if our Sword Alliance intends to grow stronger, then it must move somewhere else. Doomsday City is naturally the most suitable place for that. Yang Yi asked, So, you'd planned it in advance, right? She nodded in response. I've gained a clear understanding of everything in Doomsday City, and I have completed a string of plans as well. So long as we conquer Doomsday City, I'll be able to arrange everything as soon as possible. Yang Yi gazed at her for a short while and said, Miss Yi, I'm really lucky to have you. If he didn't have Yi Luyun, then it would be absolutely impossible for the Sword Alliance to be managed in such an orderly manner. Yi Luyun spoke softly. Actually, I'm lucky to have you as well. Both of them exchanged glances and smiled. Words weren't needed to express their feelings. Boss! Meanwhile, Huan Kong suddenly walked over to Yang Ye's side and said, Air, that sword technique you executed earlier was so cool. So very cool. Air, right. Lin Fan wants to learn it, and he asked me to help him ask you if you're willing to teach it to us. What nonsense! Meanwhile, Lin Fan, who'd been paying attention to what was going on here, had instantly exploded with rage. You wanted to learn it yet are using my name. How shameless are you? Huan Kong glanced at Lin Fan and spoke indifferently. Do you dare to say that you don't want to learn it? Lin Fan was speechless. Yang Yi glanced at them and said, All of you want to learn that technique? All of them hurriedly nodded. Even Lin Fan. Yang Yi nodded. I can teach it to all of you, but I have conditions. Huan Kong quickly asked, What conditions? Yang Yi replied, In the future, the Sword Alliance will implement a point system. Want treasures? Sword techniques? Exchange points for them. As for how to obtain those points, it's very simple. Just complete missions for the Sword Alliance or exchange other treasures for points. Besides that, I'll establish a sword rankings and it'll only have 10 spots on it. Those in the top 10 will gain a certain amount of points every month. In short, I'll get Miss Yi to deal with the details of the point system. Yi Luyun glanced at him and nodded slightly. Everyone felt that Yang Yi was an impulse and brainless person, but she felt that Yang Yi was actually very smart on many occasions. Just like what had just happened. He hadn't just taught them his sword technique. After all, others would never cherish things they obtained without contributing anything. Moreover, if that continued for long, they would feel like it was a matter of course. But by carrying out the point system, it made things simpler. If one wanted something, one would have to pay for it with points. If one wanted to accumulate points, then one had to work for the Sword Alliance or ascend the sword rankings. It could be said that the point system had eliminated many future problems and motivated the Sword Alliance's members. Huan Kong and the others nodded to display their agreement once they heard Yang Yi. They were smart people, so they naturally understood Yang Ye's intentions. Meanwhile, Yang Yi suddenly said, We're here. All of them looked up and a huge city had appeared within their fields of vision. Yilun spoke softly. See those turrets on the city walls? Those are plasma turrets that Doomsday City obtained from an ancient ruin. It's extremely strong and capable of posing a threat to emperors. Yang Yi looked over and saw 5 such turrets on Doomsday City. Yang Ye's figure flashed up into the sky above the city. Meanwhile, an old man shot out of the city. It was the same old man who'd fled before Yang Yi a while ago. The old man spoke in a low voice. What's the meaning of this? What's the meaning of this? Yang Yi chuckled. Are you joking? What do you think I'm here for? The old man spoke with a gloomy expression on his face. Do you really want to fight until both our forces are destroyed? Both our forces are destroyed? Can you even do that? Yang Yi gazed at the old man and said, Let me make this short. Those who surrender will be spared. As for those who refuse to surrender, I'll kill every single one of them. If none agree to surrender, then I'll slaughter the entire city. He intends to slaughter the city. The old man's expression changed. It wasn't just the old man. The expressions of the members of the Sword Alliance had changed slightly as well. However, they didn't say anything. Dark Hell Continent was a dog-eat-dog world. Since they'd been able to live until now, they were absolutely not pedantic fellows. The old man fell silent for a long time before he spoke. It was my Doomsday City's mistake, and we're willing to apologize and compensate you. Yang Yi walked towards the old man and said, Do you not understand what I just said? As Yang Yi moved closer to the old man, a terrifying pressure instantly forced the old man to take successive steps back. The old man was shocked. He hurriedly spoke when he noticed that Yang Yi seemed to be about to attack. You can't destroy the order here. Yang Yi stopped and asked, Order? What order? The old man heaved a sigh of relief. The 6 great powers are the publicly acknowledged diamond rank powers of the continent. For the sake of preventing large-scale wars on the continent, the World Devastator cult decreed that the various large powers of the continent are prohibited from fighting and killing each other. That's why even if conflict has arisen incessantly amongst us, we haven't ever gone to war. If you dare to destroy my Doomsday City today, then it's equivalent to challenging the order created by the World Devastator cult, and destroying that order is equivalent to provoking the World Devastator cult. He's not lying. Meanwhile, Dugu Jian suddenly walked over to Yang Ye's side. But there's something he failed to mention. The other 5 powers have to give violet crystals to the World Devastator cult. Even though all of them are diamond rank powers, the World Devastator cult is the true big brother amongst them, and they have to act according to its will. This so-called order that the World Devastator cult created was actually created for their own benefit. Very few people are aware of this. Even I wouldn't be aware of it if I wasn't the junior city governor of Violet Thistle City. Xianxia asked, "You're saying that the World Devastator cult will help them if we try to destroy them?" Dugu Jian nodded. "It's very likely, because they once said that anyone who dares to destroy the order that they created is their enemy." Xianxia shook his head and said, "I don't care about the World Devastator cult. All I know is that Doomsday City wanted to destroy my Sword Alliance. Since Doomsday City wanted to destroy my Sword Alliance will destroy Doomsday City. It's just that simple. If the World Devastator cult wants to destroy my Sword Alliance, that's fine as well. Let them come." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia turned around and looked at the old man. "Will you surrender or not?" "You." The old man intended to say something, but Xianxia shook his head instead. "It seems like you don't want to surrender. Since you don't, then die." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia was about to attack. But the old man was prepared, and his figure instantly vanished on the spot. "Fire!" At the same time, a voice resounded in the air above the city. Bang! 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 5 enormous beams of black light surged out from Doomsday City, and its target was Xianxia's group. Xianxia swung the sword in his right hand. A ray of sword energy swept out horizontally, and the beams of black light were instantly obliterated. A moment later, Xianxia swung his sword again, and a ray of sword energy instantly slammed against the city's gates. Bang! The city gates were instantly transformed into powder. Xianxia's voice resounded, "Attack! Kill all who resist." The others didn't hesitate to surge into the city. Suddenly, a blue-robed old man appeared before the entrance to the city. The old man raised his right hand slightly before slapping it down at the members of the Sword Alliance. Bang! The space in the area before them collapsed in an instant, and it astounded the members of the Sword Alliance. Meanwhile, Xianxia appeared in front of them, and then a strand of sword intent formed a barrier before them and instantly stabilized the expanse of collapsing space. A short moment later, everything here returned to normal. "You're the first person that has dared to look down on my World Devastator cult." The blue-robed old man gazed at Xianxia and said, "But you do have some ability." Xianxia asked, "Your World Devastator cult intends to protect Doomsday City?" The blue-robed old man said, "The order we created can't be destroyed. So, Doomsday City can't be destroyed. Watch me." As soon as Xianxia finished speaking, he transformed into a ray of light that shot forward. At the same time, his voice resounded once more, "Attack! Kill any who dare to fight back." "How dare you?" The old man roared with fury and was about to attack. However, a terrifying force pressed down upon him and caught him off guard, causing him to be almost pressed down to his knees. Sword intent above the void rank. The old man was shocked. However, a sword had pressed against the center of his forehead at the exact same moment. The old man gazed at Xianxia with astonishment. Your sword intent is actually above the void rank." Xianxia said, "I don't want to become enemies with the World Devastator cult." The old man immediately said, "I don't think you would even dare to immediately order your forces out of Doomsday City, or..." Hiss! Xianxia's sword instantly stabbed through the old man's head, and a string of blood sprayed out from the back of the old man's head while his eyes swiftly opened wide. "You think too highly of yourself." Xianxia's voice resounded by the old man's ears.